My mission is to help more women in corporate get promoted. And even if you doubt yourself, I promise you, you are capable of landing and thriving in that next promotion. Here's the crazy thing though. The number one thing that gets you promoted in a corporate environment is the number one thing that I see people forgetting to do. In today's episode, I'm going to reveal what that thing is, and I'm going to teach you 16 actionable tips to help you get promoted faster. Welcome to the Art of Speaking Up, a podcast that helps professional women access the limitless potential that lies within them. I'm your host, Jessica Guzik, and my mission is to help you find that spark inside you that has the power to transform your career in ways you may not have thought possible. I'm so excited that you're here. And now, on to the show. Welcome to the podcast. Today's episode is all about helping you get promoted. One of the big missions behind why I started this podcast and why I do the work that I do is I'm extremely passionate about helping women in corporate rise into leadership positions. And for that reason, I wanted to do an episode where I bring together all of my knowledge on how to advance and get promoted in a corporate setting without overworking. A lot of times when we are wanting to get promoted, we think to ourselves, okay, I need to do more so people see how valuable I am. And this can lead to overworking and taking on too many projects, and it can really lead you to burnout. And what I have noticed to be true consistently, both in my corporate career as well as in the career paths of my clients, is that taking on more work is one of the most inefficient pathways to getting promoted. A lot of times when you try to take on more work and say yes to everything, it ends up backfiring and it can actually slow down your path to promotion. So you might be thinking to yourself, okay, if it's not hard work that's going to get me promoted, then what is it that's going to get me promoted? And that is what we are diving very deeply into in today's episode. Today, I'm going to be sharing 16 different action steps that you can take to speed up your path to promotion. I want you to know about the strategic moves that will help you get ahead in an organization. I'm going to be covering 4 different categories of action steps. The 4 categories I'm covering in today's episode are relationship building, communication skills, strategic workload management, and professional development conversations. And for each of those buckets, I have a series of very tactical action steps that I'm going to recommend that you take. Now, before I dive in, I have 2 important caveats that I want to share. Number 1, I'm sharing a lot of tips and information in today's episode. Please don't let it overwhelm you and don't use it against yourself. So don't say to yourself, oh my gosh, Jess is sharing all of these tips and I'm not doing any of them and I'm failing in my goal of getting promoted and I'm such a horrible person and let me just forget about my goals and dreams because I'm doing all of this wrong. No. We are not allowing that to happen. The corporate game of getting promoted is a tricky, challenging game, so don't use it against yourself and don't get down on yourself if the tips that I'm sharing feel new to you. There was a point in my career where these tips were news to me, and I was completely sabotaging my own growth and my path to promotion, and I didn't even realize it. So I learned these tips by messing these things up. We all start somewhere. And my recommendation is that you pick 1 or 2 action steps from this episode and start with those and then build gradually from there. You don't have to do this all at once. The second quick caveat is that in today's episode, I'm not covering any tips around doing great work or producing solid deliverables. And this is because most of my clients and most of the women who listen to this show are already doing that. If you are listening to this podcast, there's a really good chance that your work is good and that you don't need to focus on doing good work. You are already doing good work, and now it's time for you to work a little bit less hard and focus on some of these other more strategic things. So with all of that shared, let's get into the first category of action steps, which is relationship building. So I'm starting with relationship building because it is one of the most important categories of action steps to take, and it's also a category that I often see people overlooking. So let me start with sharing this premise. Promotions in a corporate setting are not always based on merit. More often than not, promotions are based on relationships, and high-up leaders in an organization will tend to promote people they like faster than they promote people they don't like. And sometimes this tendency to promote people who they like is so strong that they will promote people who they like, even if those people aren't as good at the job as other people. This isn't fair, and this doesn't always make sense, but it's an important reality to be aware of if getting promoted is important to you. Now, I can do an entire episode just on this idea, exploring whether it's fair and why this is the case. But I think what would be much more helpful for you is if I give you tips on how to navigate this reality so that you can get promoted. And so with that said, I'm going to share with you 6 tips on how to strengthen your relationship with leaders at your company so that you can speed up your path to promotion. Tip number 1, I want you to commit to spending 30 minutes per week on relationship building activities. Now, you might be wondering what that means. Like, what does it mean to do relationship building? How on earth are you supposed to fill those 30 minutes? So luckily, I have 5 more tips for you. And these are all examples of relationship building activities that you can use to fill the 30 minutes. So tip number 2 is the first activity that you can fill this time with, which is write down a list of all of the leaders at your company who fall into one of 2 potential categories. Number 1, the work that you do impacts them or their team. And number 2, you admire them. And I want you to look at that list and ask yourself, when was the last time I had a conversation with this person that was not tied to an immediate work project? When was the last time I asked them how things were going for them? You want to look at that list and put asterisks next to the names of people who you haven't really had any interpersonal conversations with in a long time. And that brings me to tip number 3, which is outreach. Another way that you can fill the 30 minutes of time is by reaching out to a stakeholder on this list and asking them if they'd like to spend 30 minutes grabbing coffee with you so that you could get up to speed on their priorities and better support them through the work that you're doing in the business. Now, whenever I tell my clients to do this, usually they feel very afraid to reach out. And a lot of times what they say is, I'm inviting them to have coffee with me, and I don't even know what I'm inviting them to talk about. So I feel weird even reaching out to them because I cannot imagine in my mind how this conversation is going to go. So for me to help resolve that question and help you learn how to approach those coffee chats, that brings me to tip number 4, which is to spend time reflecting on how you can super serve the leaders in your company. Super serve means that you're going above and beyond when it comes to how much you are helping a stakeholder reach their goals. This isn't about overworking and taking on a greater volume of work. It's about being deeply thoughtful and asking yourself, when I think about the work that me and my team are doing, and then I think about this other leader in my company and the things that matter most to them, if I am keeping in mind the things that matter most to them, how might I change the way that I'm approaching my work in order to better support them and the goals that matter to them? And as soon as you ask yourself this question, you start thinking about your work differently. And it becomes less about just cranking out deliverables and more about making sure that those deliverables are actually helpful to the leaders across your organization. Because, spoiler, when your work is highly helpful to the leaders in your organization, you get promoted faster. So how do you figure out how to be helpful to them? You figure that out by asking them what would be helpful to them. So these coffee chats are a way of gathering key information on their priorities and their challenges and their aspirations. And when you know that information, you can keep all of that in mind as you are executing your work. And what's going to happen is you're going to encounter moments where you realize, oh, I had coffee with Bob 2 months ago. And in that coffee chat, Bob told me that his team has been struggling with this particular thing over and over. One of my teammates just built a solution for a very similar pain point. I bet that if my teammate sits with someone on Bob's team for an hour, my teammate could take that solution and give it to Bob's team, and then Bob will have solved the problem that he told me about when we had coffee. If you didn't have that coffee chat with Bob, it would never have occurred to you to take this solution that your team member built and offer it to Bob and Bob's team. So the more we know about the priorities and struggles of the leaders who sit in the organization that we are a part of, the more that we can spot opportunities to super serve them and be highly valuable to them. Your coffee chats are a way of gathering this information. Okay, I have 2 more relationship building tips. Number 5 is very straightforward, doing the actual coffee chats. So I mentioned that you want to do 30 minutes a week on relationship building. If you have a 30-minute coffee chat on your calendar for the week, that can count as filling your 30-minute quota. And the final tip number 6, is reach out to leaders that you have worked with in the past. So you don't need to confine your relationship building to the leaders at your current company. It's also a good idea to ask yourself, what bosses and leaders from past places I've worked at have I not chatted with in a while? And just send them a note to say that you thought of them and you'd love to catch up if they have time over the next few weeks. So that brings me to the end of the relationship building tips. And before I move on to the second section, which are communication tips, I just want to share one final push to encourage you to take this super seriously and put this into action. Relationship building activities are the thing that are most likely to get procrastinated because, number one, they're a little bit scary to do, and we tend to procrastinate scary things. And number 2, they don't have an immediate urgency. I want to encourage you to push past that. I know it's uncomfortable and I know it takes a little bit of time, but I promise you it is way more uncomfortable to not do this and to be frustrated a year from now or 2 years from now because you're not where you want to be professionally. So please get out there and start doing these things. And I promise you, the more you do it, the more natural it's going to feel. Okay, so now we are moving into the next section of tips, which are all around communication. Here's why communication matters so much. I haven't explicitly stated this in today's episode yet, but it is the people at the top of your organization, the leaders in your organization, who are going to make the final decision on whether you get promoted or not. Now, how do they know you? How do they form their understanding of who you are and what you bring to the table? They form that understanding primarily through the FaceTime that they have with you. And when I say FaceTime, I just mean anytime you are in any sort of meeting or room with them. And the way that you really stand out during those limited slivers of time is through your communication. It's your voice and speaking up that they are exposed to, and they are exposed to that way more than they're exposed to your actual execution. This is why having solid verbal communication skills is such a non-negotiable if you want to move into a leadership role in a corporate setting. So I'm going to walk you through 5 action steps that will help you communicate in a way that shows people that you are ready for a promotion and makes them more likely to make a bet on you and move you into a bigger role. So we are at tip number 7 in the overall list, which is speak up and get visible when there are senior leaders in the room. This is super important. You get limited face time with senior level stakeholders, so you want to make the most of it. You want to show them you are focused. You want to show them you are determined. You want to show them you have good ideas. You want them to see your drive. You want them to feel that level of commitment that you have. And when you're quiet, sometimes they see the opposite. They see that you're not committed. They see that you don't have a lot of drive. And it's not because you actually lack drive. It's just because the only way for them to see your drive in a meeting is for you to speak up. In that meeting, they have no idea how many deliverables you've been producing for the remaining X hours that you have left in the day. All they see is what happens in that room. So if you are working hard behind the scenes and then coming to meetings and not contributing and not being part of the discussion, that's all they have to go off of. And in their mind, they might think, she doesn't seem super fired up. She doesn't seem like she's super in this. I'm not really getting the feeling that she's highly committed. And then imagine 3 months from now, they get an email from your boss asking to promote you. What are they going to go off of in making that decision? They're going to be hamstrung by the experiences that they've had with you. I'm being very animated about this and passionate about this because I know that this is a big challenge. It can feel very emotionally vulnerable and exposing to get your voice out there and speak up. I know I'm intimately familiar with how hard it is because number one, I had deep struggles with this in my corporate career and I had to do a lot of inner psychological work to find my voice and have that confidence. And number two, this is the primary thing that I help my clients with. So I understand the level of difficulty. And sometimes we have to do work on ourselves to find that strength and find our voice in the room. I know I certainly did, but I want to emphasize how important it is and how worth it is to do this work, because having a voice in the room is how you establish the reputation as someone who's really good at their job without you having to work like crazy behind the scenes. So that's tip number 7, which is speak and be visible in meetings. Now, tips number 8 and 9 are specific ways that you can do that. So tip number 8 is a double tip. It's 2 tips in one, but it is push back and ask questions. So a lot of times when we think about speaking up in the room, we think that we have to come with all of the ideas and we have to have the answer. This is untrue. Asking questions is a way that you demonstrate that you are committed to helping everyone in the room move things forward. And it is especially important for you to ask clarifying questions, because when you ask clarifying questions, you have the context that you need to contribute to the conversation. Now, a lot of my clients are afraid to ask questions because their thought process is, I'm supposed to understand this. This is supposed to make sense to me. And if it's not making sense to me, that must mean that I'm not good at my job. I'm not smart enough to be in this room. Everyone understands something that I don't understand. And if I ask this question, I'm going to look stupid, and that is going to be bad for my career. Now, I have so many thoughts on this, but let me share some of the biggest pieces of guidance that will help you with this. I personally have just erased the phrase stupid questions from my vocabulary. I think that there are only 2 types of questions: foundational questions and advanced questions. Foundational questions are questions that we ask when we are trying to establish the foundations so that we understand the subject matter. So, an example of a foundational question is when you go to the doctor's office and you fill out the forms and they ask you foundational questions. They ask you, are you taking any medications? Do you have any allergies? Now, my guess would be that when you fill out those forms, I don't think you're thinking, wow, this doctor is asking very basic questions. They must be really stupid and really dumb. No, you're thinking, oh, this doctor needs to understand the foundations so that they can actually be a good doctor and help me get what I need from my doctor's appointment. So that's the same thought process your stakeholders have when you ask a foundational question. They're not going to be thinking, oh my God, I can't believe she wants this information. They're going to be thinking, oh, she's asking for this information so that she can help us, so that she can do her job well. So that's foundational questions. And then advanced questions are questions that we ask that are based on a more advanced understanding of the topic at hand. However, a question isn't inherently more valuable just because it's a more advanced question. I'm sure that you've been in rooms where someone asked a foundational question and it was valuable to every single person in the room. So a question being more advanced doesn't equal you being more impressive or you adding more value in the room. That is not a true correlation. So I want you to just toss the idea of stupid questions out the window. And from this point forward, there are only foundational questions and advanced questions. And while advanced questions might sound very sparkly and flashy and exciting, don't be deceived by them. Sometimes foundational questions are far more powerful. Okay, I don't want to rabbit hole too much into this, so I'm going to move on to the next tip, which is tip number 9, which is generate direction. This is very, 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 very important. There are 2 types of people in an organization. There are people who follow directions and people who generate directions. I have an entire episode on this topic. If you want to go deeper into it, I will link it in the show notes. But you really want to show people that you are the type of person who generates direction. Because when your company is promoting you, they need to know that once you're in the position, you're not going to just wait for people to tell you what to do. You're going to generate direction and you're going to tell people what you think you should do in the position. So you need to show people that you possess this trait, which means that when you're in meetings and conversations with leaders and stakeholders, you want to be helping them shape the goal, shape the outcome, shape the next step, shape the process, shape the approach. You are not there to be reactive and you are not there to just be asked your opinion. You are there to say things like, okay, it sounds like the goal is X. Do we all feel aligned with that? Or to say things like, it sounds like we've solved this question. Should we now tackle this next thing? These are examples of you generating direction. And this leads perfectly into tip number 10, which is to demonstrate something called bias to action. Bias to action means that you have a bias for taking action. And people who have a bias to action get things done faster, they can handle harder projects, and they make better leaders because even when obstacles come up, they always have a bias to action. And they're always thinking, what action can we take? What next step can we take? How can we move this forward? So companies really like to promote people who demonstrate bias to action. So when you're leading meetings and when you're in other people's meetings, I want you to always be thinking, what's the next step here, everyone? Where are we moving towards? What conclusion can we draw? What next step should we move on to? What should we talk about next? How can we solve this? How can we move forward? You bring this energy of like, let's move this forward. Let's get something done. Let's move on to the next thing. Let's knock out some of these deliverables. When people feel that energy from you, it really makes them see you as a leader and trust that you can handle bigger things. Now, I have a free worksheet that teaches you in depth how to demonstrate bias to action through the way that you communicate. And it is a very beginner-friendly worksheet. I will link it in the show notes, and I highly recommend downloading it because it will change the way that you communicate and help you speak in a way that gets you promoted faster. Okay, the final tip in the communication section of today's episode is to speak in a way that focuses on impact. This is one of the key tools that I teach inside of my program because it is one of the most powerful ways to differentiate yourself as a leader through the way that you communicate. And the best way for me to teach you how to communicate in a way that focuses on impact is through an analogy. I want you to imagine that you have been saving up for a really nice car, and you are so excited. You finally hit your savings goal. It is time for you to walk into the dealership and have your dream come true and get in there and purchase the car of your dreams. And you're so excited about it. And you walk into the dealership, and the salesperson in the dealership says, "All right, tell me about what car you want." And you say, "I've been saving for a while and I'm ready to buy this specific model." And they say to you, "Okay, great. Let's get the paperwork signed. Here, come back with me. Let's sit at my desk. Let's get this going. You could be out of here within 5 to 10 minutes. And all of a sudden, in that moment, you feel a little disappointed and you're thinking to yourself, wait, can we look at the car? Can we touch it? Can you tell me about its features? And you're thinking in your head, I've been saving up for this car for months. This moment was really special. And I really would have loved it if the salesperson could help me get excited about this car and tell me how great it is. And I kind of want them to sell me on it a little bit because this is such a special moment for me. And it feels really anticlimactic that I'm just walking in and filling out paperwork. I really wanted to feel inspired. I wanted to imagine what my life is going to be like after I bought this car. And I was relying on the salesperson to help me have that experience. So when you imagine buying a car, there's two ways it can go. You can have this very transactional exchange with the salesperson where you told them that you want to buy the car and they're like, "Great, let's fill out the paperwork." And they skip over actually talking about the car and taking you on that journey. Or you can have an experience where they say, "This is so exciting. Let's talk through some of the features. Let's have you sit in the driver's seat. Let me show you some of the cool innovations that they've added into this car." And so you can see how in a car dealership, you can have these two very different experiences. And similarly, when you're communicating with leaders at your company, you can offer them two very different kinds of experiences. It's as if you're the car salesperson, and when it's time for you to communicate your work to an audience of leaders, you can either be very transactional and just get them in, get them out, get them the bare bones information that they need and keep it quick, or you can take them on a journey and get them excited about the impact of your work and excited about how your work is contributing to their goals and to a future success that they are going to get to be a part of. And if you're interested in getting promoted, you want to make sure to do the latter. You want to make sure that you're talking to your audience about the impact of your work. You're getting them excited about your work. You're taking them on a journey through your work. This is at the heart of what it means to be really good at executive communication. It means you know how to move out of that transactional way of sharing information and into a more aspirational and inspirational way of sharing your work with your audience and taking them on a journey that engages them emotionally. So that is tip number 11, and that rounds out the section on communication. We have 2 more sections left. The next section is all about strategically managing your workload. This is super important. If you want to get promoted faster, you have to pivot from you just responding to what people are asking you to do to you becoming proactive about setting vision and managing your project pipeline. So tip number 12 is demonstrate vision. This is extremely important. At least once a quarter, I want you to zoom out and look at everything you're working on and ask yourself, are there any adjustments to my workload that would help me add more value to the organization? And once you've answered that question, I want you to bring that answer to your boss and say to them, I've been stepping back to look at my workload and ask myself how I can better add value to the organization. And I came up with some ideas that I'd love to walk you through. When you do this, it shows your boss that you are capable of setting vision and setting direction. This is really important because if you're promoted into a bigger role, you're going to be expected to set more vision and set more direction. So if you start doing that today, your boss has cold, hard proof that you are capable of being a visionary leader, and that is going to help them feel that much more solid to promote you. This also leads into tips number 13 and 14, which are closely connected. So tip number 13 is to slow down or eliminate low-value work. So low-value work is any work that you do that isn't creating a lot of value for your organization. Just because someone has an idea for a project or someone has an idea for something that you could do doesn't mean you should do it. And while I know it's tempting to always say yes when you get asked to do something, you have to remember that anytime you say yes to something, you're also saying no to something else. And every low-value project that you are working on is time that you can no longer spend on high-value projects, which leads me to tip number 14, which is replace low-value projects with high-value projects. High-value projects are projects that are having a bigger impact on your company's goals. The higher value a project is, number one, the more it bolsters your reputation, and number two, the more it exposes you to senior leadership in your organization. Senior leadership in your organization is not interested in sitting in on meetings about teeny tiny projects that aren't moving the needle forward. And the reverse is true. If a project is having a big impact within your organization, leaders in your organization are going to want to be a part of it, and they're going to want to see what you're working on. So it's super important that your workload is aligned with things that senior leaders at your organization care about. And by the way, this is a great way to prevent overworking. By deprioritizing low-value projects and prioritizing high-value projects, you're going to start taking control over your workload, and you're going to make sure that you are not being bogged down by a million little things and that you're focused on the things that truly move the needle for your company. And I really want to emphasize something that's very important. Saying no to the wrong projects makes you look good. A lot of times we think that we look good by saying yes to things. Sometimes we look good by saying no to things because we demonstrate to our boss and our leaders that we are not just lemmings who say yes to anything that gets thrown at us, but that we are critical thinkers who are making sure that our time and energy is going towards the things that matter most within an organization. So I know it can feel a little bit sticky to say no when someone says, hey, can you do this thing for me? And you know it's not super valuable, but you have to keep in mind that your time is finite and that by saying no to that, you're saying yes to something else. And you can even leverage that and use it to your advantage when you say no. So let's say Bob reaches out to you and says, hey, can you build this deliverable for me? And you know that that's not a good use of your time. You could say that's a super interesting idea. Recently, I've been focusing all of my time on this big area because it's such a priority for the business. I'd be happy to keep this in mind for the future, and I can let you know if capacity opens up on my team. And now Bob knows that the reason that you declined to do this thing that he asked you to do is because you have bigger fish to fry, and that makes you look good. And this is something that all good leaders do. If you want to get ahead in an organization, you have to know how to strategically say no to things. If you don't know how to strategically say no to things, news travels fast. People will realize that. And when people realize that there's someone in an organization who never says no, that's like a slot machine that they could put money in and win the jackpot every single time. No matter what you get asked for, you're going to do it, which means all of those annoying requests are going to get funneled towards you because you're the person that people know will say yes. And often we don't get rewarded for that type of work. So it's super important to develop the habit of saying no. Okay, we are almost at the final stretch. We are moving into the last section of today's episode, which are action steps around professional development conversations. So I have 2 tips for you. Tip number 15 is you should be having regular feedback sessions with your manager. You should be spending, at minimum, 30 minutes a month talking with your manager about you and your performance and your professional development within the company. And these meetings should be happening always. So they shouldn't be happening only when your company is about to go through a merit cycle or only when it's time for the end of the year reviews. Feedback should be happening always. When feedback is happening all of the time, it is much easier to pivot that feedback and begin asking your manager if they would be willing to back you in asking for a promotion. It is much harder to ask your manager to do that when you haven't been having any professional development conversations with them at all, because then you're starting from zero. You don't even know how you're doing. You don't know what they think of your performance. You don't know what feedback they have for you. And all of a sudden, you're trying to go from, I have no idea how I'm doing, and we haven't talked about my performance in over 6 months, to I'm now asking my boss for a promotion. That's a very difficult leap to ask your boss to make. You want to be having these regular professional development conversations so that you know that you're performing well and that your boss is happy. When you know that, then it's much easier to say, I appreciate all the feedback that you've been giving me in these monthly feedback conversations. And I was wondering if maybe in our next one, we could talk about my growth path within the company and what it could look like for me to evolve into a bigger role. What are your thoughts? And that's going to be an easy yes for your manager because you've been having professional development conversations with them all along. If you are not spending at least 30 minutes with your manager talking about your professional development, I want you to set that up now. If you are going to be talking with your boss face-to-face today, then at the end of that face-to-face time, I want you to say, hey, I've been thinking about my professional development, and I was wondering if you'd be open to doing a brief monthly feedback session with me. You don't even need to worry about the agenda. I can bring questions and topics for us to explore. What do you think? Or if you don't have FaceTime with your manager today, I want you to take that exact same thing that I shared and put it in an email and email your manager to make the ask. This is so urgent and so important. Don't let your brain procrastinate it. Don't let your brain talk you out of it. And if your brain does try to talk you out of it, just ask yourself, am I okay with it taking longer for me to get promoted? Am I okay with next promotion cycle, I might not get what I want? Am I okay with that? If I'm not okay with that, then I got to reach out to my manager today to set this up. Because if I wait till tomorrow, it's going to be equally uncomfortable tomorrow. It's never going to be less uncomfortable than it feels in this moment, which means this moment is the best possible time to get it done. And this brings me to tip number 16, which is once you've been having regular feedback conversations with your manager, and once you have established that they are happy with your performance, let them know that you are interested in growth. You can say something like, I've been thinking about my professional development, and growing into a bigger role is super important to me. And I've been so happy working here at this company that I want to experience that growth here so that I can really build a long-term career path in this organization. I would love to talk about whether you see me as being ready for that next promotion and what it could look like to get me from where I'm at now into that position. So you want to say that to your manager so they know that this is important to you, and it also communicates that you are very committed to this organization and that you want to stay in the organization and add value. And that is going to kick off a set of conversations that you and your manager will have around your readiness for a promotion, the different options for what that could look like within your team or across your organization, and the logistics, timing, and next steps. So there you have it, 16 action steps to help you get promoted faster. And I want to urge you to pick one or two, take those really seriously. And then once you feel like you're nailing it, come back, listen to this episode again, and pick another one to work on and approach this in small steps. I'm always telling my clients that the fastest way to grow is to grow slowly. So you don't need to try to do 16 things at once. You just need to start with something. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. It is such a joy to have you here and have you listening. In the show notes, I'm going to include all of the free resources that I mentioned in today's episode, including the Bias to Action worksheet. And I will include a link to my signature program, the Art of Speaking Up Academy, which is where I support you in building internal confidence and developing a potent and powerful voice as a leader. What makes the Art of Speaking Up Academy so effective is you learn the practical communication skills that you need to sound very polished and crisp, but you also get to do the inner work to grow your self-confidence so that you have the courage and boldness to speak up in the room. If you are ready to experience that transformation, I strongly encourage you to add yourself to the waitlist. When you join the waitlist, you will be offered the opportunity to enroll early in the upcoming cohorts of this program, and there is very little space remaining in the next two cohorts, so the waitlist is likely going to be the only way to get a spot in the Art of Speaking Up Academy between now and 2026. I will add the waitlist link in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Bye!